Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. I'm very glad to have you on our TV show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Today we have a very distinguished guest, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine and former Ambassador to NATO, Mr. Kurt Volker. Thank you again for joining us for an interview. So, you were among the first who demanded closing the airspace of Ukraine for humanitarian purposes. Can you say that after the Lend-Lease and Ramstein, what the West is doing now is enough to defeat Russia?
Well, I would start off with Ukraine. What Ukraine is doing now is actually defeating Russia. And we are helping. We're providing arms and assistance to give the Ukrainians some of the tools that they need. But the Ukrainians have shown remarkable courage, resolve, determination, the ability to fight. They stopped the Russian advance against Kyiv and pushed it back. They are now holding the line in eastern Ukraine and in the south, and they will continue to fight, and the West will continue to help them.
So I fully agree with you. And the next question, what do you think Russia's defeat will be in war with Ukraine? Freezing the conflict and keeping Russian influence on some parts of the Ukrainian territory, or full expulsion of the Russian army beyond the borders of Ukraine and restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, or even more, Russia's demilitarization into a non-nuclear based, state?
So, first off, I think what's going to happen is Putin is going to try to consolidate control of eastern Ukraine and the southeast of Ukraine, including Mariupol. So he connects all of this to Russian territory, all the way to Kherson and Crimea. And he may even decide to annex all of this territory, claim to annex it, to make it part of Russia. That being said, I don't believe the Ukrainians will allow that. Even if they are not able to stop it today, I don't think they're going to accept that Russia will have just taken more of their country, and they will continue to fight. And in the end, I think they will push the Russians back. The Russians have shown that their military is in terrible disarray. They have low morale, they have poor training, they have poor equipment, they have poor command and control and leadership. And meanwhile, the sanctions are putting significant pressure on the Russian economy. And so as a result of that, I think that they will be in a weak position and Ukraine will continue to push back. Now, I don't think Ukraine will try to expel Russia from Crimea at this stage, but I do think they will try to do so from the areas that Russia has recently taken, north of Crimea and in eastern Ukraine. And as far as what that means, Russia will be a diminished state at the end of this conflict. Maybe not in terms of territory, but in terms of international respect, in terms of the economy, the ability to do business, oil and gas exports. Its civilian and military leaders will be pursued for war crimes through international tribunals. It's going to be a much diminished country. And meanwhile, Ukraine will emerge stronger. They have fought to protect their sovereignty, their independence. It has reinforced their sense of national identity, and they will get significant help from the international community, the European Union, the United States, to rebuild. And that rebuilding will be done in such a way that will strengthen Ukraine and link it more closely to the rest of Europe.
Thank you. What kind of security architecture can we be expecting in Europe and the Black Sea region after the war in Ukraine comes to an end?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk right now about new types of security guarantees for Ukraine. Zelensky is taking Putin at his word when Putin says that NATO is a threat to Russia and that Ukraine has been a threat to Russia, and Ukrainian membership in NATO would be unacceptable. So he's saying, fine, we don't have to join NATO, but we do need security guarantees because we're obviously being attacked and we need to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. So the Ukrainians are indeed talking with other countries. Presidential advisor Yermak was in Turkey talking with the Turks about security guarantees. There have been conversations with the UK and Poland. And just yesterday I saw that the Foreign Minister Kuleba mentioned that China could also perhaps be approached about security guarantees. All that being said, I don't really believe that there are any security guarantees that work or make sense other than NATO. We saw, for instance, the Budapest Memorandum, where Russia, France, the UK, and the United States promised to respect and protect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia violated that, and no one did anything. And so I think that any other security guarantees would not measure up. Really, Article 5 of NATO is what matters. And at the end of the war, if it plays out as I expect, with a diminished Russia and a strengthened Ukraine that has fought its way back, I don't see any reason why they would not be invited to join NATO.
Thank you. You know Georgia very well, and your professional opinion about the current situation in Georgia is extremely valuable for us. What must Georgia do not to be left behind the Western security shield?
Oh, well, I think your question puts it exactly the right way. Georgia is no longer in the driver's seat. A few years ago, people would have said that Georgia was the country most ready to be invited to join NATO or to be even possibly considered for closer ties to the EU. Ukraine, too big and too difficult. Moldova, really not ready. Georgia would have been there. But we've seen a couple things now. First off, Georgian democracy has suffered as a result of poor conduct of elections, the opposition not joining the parliament, the rejection of the Charles Michel plan, which could have gotten things back on track. So now everyone is looking at Georgia as having gone backwards on democracy and waiting for the next elections and hoping that they come out better in terms of a free and fair process and everyone playing their respective roles under the Constitution. So that's on the one side. On the other side, Ukraine has emerged as a serious, determined country defending itself against Russian aggression. They have done admirably, and as a result of that, in the EU and in the United States, Ukraine is now looked at much more favorably as a sovereign, independent, and European state. And so their opportunities to move toward NATO and the EU are now greater than they were before. And it's Ukraine that's really in the driver's seat now, where what happens with Ukraine opens the door for whether Georgia or Moldova or others would possibly be invited as well. So I think from a Georgian perspective, what Georgia needs to do, it has a good military, it has a good experience in Afghanistan and working with the U.S. It should focus on the democratic institutions and their proper functioning. It should work on judicial reform, and it should maintain the close level of contacts with the United States and other NATO allies on training and equipping and exercising, so that if there's a point when Ukraine is done with the war and being invited to join NATO or the European Union, that Georgia is ready to move in lockstep with that process.
Thank you. In what case should we be expecting Russian further military aggression against Georgia? And are current steps by the Georgian government enough to avoid Russian aggression?
Well, I think we have to all acknowledge that Russian aggression against Georgia never stopped. They took Abkhazia and South Ossetia, but then through borderization, they keep taking more. They have gone from just taking the territory to recognizing them as independent states. There have been abductions of Georgian citizens. So this aggression has always been there. At the moment, I think Russia is completely absorbed in its war against Ukraine. It is much more difficult for Russia than they expected. They've had to pull forces from other places, including from South Ossetia, to go fight in Ukraine. So I don't think they're in a position to expand their aggression against Georgia right now. But It all depends on how the war ends. If Russia is defeated and Ukraine survives as a strong and independent European state, I think we need to actually demand the international community to focus on South Ossetia and Abkhazia, as well as on eastern Ukraine and Transnistria and Crimea. We shouldn't forget about this Russian occupation there that predates the war against Ukraine. So this is something that I think we need to take up again more seriously in the context of the end of the Ukraine war.
So you have just mentioned Transnistria, and in your interview with Bloomberg, you mentioned that the last thing you meant Putin, wants to do is draw the US or NATO into the conflict. But for the past few days, after the explosions in Transnistria, the Western governments recommend their citizens leave Moldova. Do you think the Russian invasion in Moldova will really happen? And will such action trigger NATO's military response in order to prevent Russia's further invasion deep into Europe?
At the moment, I don't expect a Russian invasion to Moldova because I don't think they're capable of it. If they were, they would. But I don't think they have the capabilities right now. They're going to focus on eastern and southern Ukraine. If they were to invade Moldova, again, context matters. Are there Western forces there? Are they there to protect Moldova? Are they being attacked? Or is it Moldova only? Because Moldova, like Ukraine, is not a member of NATO. There is no collective defense commitment there. And the West has been very cautious not to intervene directly to get into a conflict with Russian forces, because that could escalate globally. So they've tried to contain the fighting to Ukraine. I think the same thing would happen if the Russians did invade Moldova. They would support Moldova, but they would try to contain the fighting there. But the most important thing, and to come back to where we are today, is Russia needs to be stopped in Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are doing an outstanding job of this, and the West is finally leaning in, providing all the types of equipment and the volume of equipment that Ukraine needs. That has to continue so that Russia is stopped there.
So, and thanks again, Mr. Ambassador, for your time and for a very engaging and interesting interview.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.